Hey everyone! Today we're going to be looking at brewing a unique twist on one of the most popular beer styles in recent years, the New England style IPA. Now love it or hate it, this hazy juice bomb of a beer has been all the rage for quite a while now. But one great thing it offers on the homebrew level is a chance to bring out the absolute best in some unique, relatively new styles of hops. Now, this style isn't new anymore, and you've probably already have seen 100 YouTube videos talking about homebrew techniques to brew the best New England IPA, or do's and don'ts, or 10 things I wish I knew, so I'm not going to go super in-depth about the style or techniques, since that would just be preaching to the choir, but I will be going over some theories about dry hopping and a little of the science behind that. But mostly what I want to show in this video is a particular recipe that showcases a very cool hop combo and give you a look into my process to brew it, hopefully inspiring some of you to try it out yourselves. So let's take a look at our recipe. Our grain bill is going to be very standard when it comes to the New England IPA style. A backbone of 2-row, a hefty dose of wheat, some flaked oats. I also have a bit of carapils added, but how much that actually adds any body or head retention has been a point of contention, so I leave it in as a form of tradition more than anything. Now let's talk about our spotlight here, the hops. This beer is basically a duet of two amazing hops, Lotus and Sabro. Lotus is a wonderful hop, and it just came out a couple years ago, and while of course boasts some good tropical fruit flavors, is notable for its creamy vanilla. Hopsteiner here lists its profile as orange, vanilla, berry, and tropical fruits, and that berries and cream or orange and vanilla is really what we're after here. Sabro hops only came out a little before Lotus in 2018, and Yakima Valley lists its profile as tangerine, coconut, tropical fruit with hints of cedar, mint, and cream. Again, that sweet fruit and cream is what we're looking for here. Now, I'll say if you just stop there, you already have a hell of a beer on your hands. Lotus and Sabro is such a cool hop combination, but this is my fourth or so iteration of this recipe, and I've been able to get some incredible punch by adding a couple background singers to this duet. Namely, Mosaic. Now, I know, everyone uses Mosaic, and it's a point of contention for some on the homebrew scene. Some people hate it, says it tastes like cat piss. Some people think it's the holy grail of hops and tastes like fruity pebbles. Now, from kegerator.com, noted for its blueberry or berry medley aromas, but other descriptors include mango, stone fruit, rosy, floral, bubblegum, tropical, citrus, grassy, pine, earthy, herbal, spice. Yeah, this hop is kind of all over the place, and we won't even get into its 4 MMP thiol potential, but I find you really do get some blueberry and even a little bubblegum if used tastefully at the end of the boil, which is going to complement our Lotus and Sabro nicely. And lastly, our second backup singer, Strata. Another relatively new hop variety, Yakima Valley lists its profile as strawberry, passion fruit, grapefruit, bubblegum, sage, and dank. There we see that bubblegum descriptor again, as well as strawberry, which will go really well with our sweet fruit and cream goal. Our hop schedule is going to be an ounce of Mosaic and a half ounce of Strata at 10 minutes, and then a heavy dose of hops for our hop stand. 1.5 ounces each of Lotus and Sabro, as well as another ounce of Mosaic will go in shortly after our wort chiller, and they'll stay in during the duration of cool down. For yeast, we're going with my favorite yeast for this style, London 3. And if you looked up anything about New England style IPAs, you're sure to have seen this yeast recommended before, and it's for good reason. It's known for its soft, smooth, and fluffy mouthfeel, it attenuates low, leaves good body and extra sweetness, and also known for its cloudiness, so it's great for haze. Its esters also complement the tropical flavors of the hops too, in my opinion, so you really can't go wrong with this yeast. It is fantastic. Our projected gravity is over 1.07, so I'm looking to pitch at least 300 billion cells into this beer. So we'll be making a starter. I won't go into too much detail on the starter, so if you're looking for some extra yeast starter information or wonder where my numbers are coming from, check out my last video, Brewing a Dead Guy Ale. Regardless, I'm going to want at least 400 billion cells so I can save some for another batch and pitch the rest. So I'll be making a 2.5 liter starter. First, we'll smack our smack pack and get our yeast going. I'll start with 3 liters of water, and we add 100 grams of DME per liter, so 300 grams of DME. We'll stir that in, kick on the heat, and then I'll add in a couple drops of Firm Cap S, which is great for preventing any boilovers. We'll boil for 10 to 15 minutes, pour it into our big Bertha flask here, top it with some tin foil, drop it in the sink here to cool down. Once cool, we'll go ahead and pour in our yeast, and I'll put that on the stir plate and we'll let that ride for a couple days. That went for 2 days, and then I put it in the fridge overnight, and you can see the yeast has settled nicely on the bottom. Now I'll decant some extra liquid here so that when I add some to my mason jar for safekeeping, I'll be sure that there's at least 100 billion cells in there. And if you're math impaired like me, check out my last video where I show the quick calculation for these volumes. So this jar will be good to make a new starter out of for a future batch, and the rest in the flask we'll put back in the fridge to let settle again so we can decant and pitch into our wort tomorrow. Let's go ahead and brew this beer. I'm starting with about 5.5 gallons of RO water, to which I'm adding 4 grams of gypsum for a touch of sulfate, and a hefty dose of calcium chloride, 9 grams. This should accentuate a softer mouthfeel while giving us plenty of calcium content for fermentation. Finally, I'm adding 4 milliliters of lactic acid to bring our mash pH down to an acceptable 5.3-ish range. We'll heat this up to about 158, aiming for a 45-minute mash at 148 degrees. Now, some people will recommend mashing higher for this style, since in theory you want to make sure you don't attenuate too low and lose your fuller body, but this is yeast dependent. And in my experience, even at these low mash temps, London 3 doesn't attenuate too much higher than 70%. Pair that with the wheat and the flaked oats of our grain bill and our calcium chloride, we're definitely still going to get a full-bodied beer with a nice soft mouthfeel. I'll weigh out my grains, and then I like to spray them down with a little water and give it a few minutes to soak in. This allows me to mill a little finer, but prevents it from totally pulverizing the husks, which helps out with recirculation and sparge. Once we're at 158, we'll go ahead and set our temp to 148 and mash in. 45 minutes later, I'll lift my grain basket, drop in this strainer, and then I open this water heater to act as my sparge. Alright, we've been boiling for a half hour now. I'll go ahead and drop in my late boil additions. To my hop spider, I got an ounce of mosaic and a half ounce of strata, and I'll throw in a whirlflock tablet as well. 10 minutes later, we'll kill the heat and drop in our wort chiller. Just a minute or two after the cold water starts flowing, I'll go ahead and drop in our hop stand additions. So another ounce of mosaic and an ounce and a half each of Sabro and Lotus. I'll give my hop spider a good stir with a sanitized spoon here. Not a lot of space here, so hard to get an actual whirlpool going, but I'll shake up my wort chiller periodically for at least a little agitation. Now that we're cooled down, I let my hop spider drain out. We can take a gravity reading. Looks like we're just a couple points under 1.07, which is pretty decent. Now this will ferment pretty well at ambient temps around 65, but I'm going to be using a little temperature control during my fermentation, and since my regular fermenter doesn't fit in my mini fridge here, we'll be fermenting this in a 6-gallon torpedo keg. I highly recommend this baby for anybody who's doing keg fermenting, since you can pretty much fit a full 5-gallon batch in here and still have some headspace. Now, 2 main tips for fermenting in a keg. 1. Remove the poppet from your gas post, and remove the stopper from your disconnect. Very important, you do not want to deal with a clogged post 2 days into fermentation. It foams over like crazy when you try to relieve the pressure. You lose gallons of beer. Not worth it. And 2, cut off some of your liquid dip tube so it doesn't go all the way down to the bottom. This lets you transfer without sucking up any trub. Or use a floating dip tube, which is what I got here. So we'll put together our keg, remembering to remove the poppet and stopper from our gas post and disconnect, and hook up a line here going into a growler of star sand for a blow-off tube. Now we can drain our kettle through our strainer and funnel here, and we'll take our yeast out of the fridge, decant some of that liquid off, and pitch that right on in our keg, along with a few drops of Firm Cap S. We'll give it a good swirl, and that'll go into our mini fridge with the temp probe taped to the side, set to 65 degrees. Okay, let's talk fermentation and dry hopping. I'm sure if you watched any other videos on the New England IPA style, you'll see recommendations of dry hopping very early on in the fermentation process to try to achieve biotransformation. Now, the truth is that biotransformation is still not fully studied, and there's still a lot to learn about it. From what I've read, it seems like the science is slowly pointing towards very specific yeast and hop combinations that can unlock new potentials from the hop's monoterpene alcohols. And it isn't necessarily some hard and fast rule that will automatically give you more hop flavor. Another reason people tend to dry hop early for this style is that the added polyphenols of the hops have a chance to permanently bind to the proteins of the wort, producing the characteristic juicy haze, and protein content of the wort is highest early on in fermentation. But I've decided to add all my dry hops on day 5, and that's for a couple reasons. 1. Dry hopping super early means that there's still a huge amount of off-gassing of CO2, which can actually scrub a lot of that hop aroma out. And 2, leaving hops in for too long will actually result in a more diminished hop punch, and could even lead to some grassy or vegetal flavors, and especially will result in a higher polyphenol count, which can lead to that hop burn or astringent sensation. That hop burn can also arise by simply dry hopping too much. I've noticed dry hop rates as little as 2 ounces a gallon has led to some hop burn for me, so my rule of thumb is to keep my dry hop quantities between 1 and 2 ounces per gallon, or dry hop with cryo hops or even hop extract to keep vegetal mass low. Now, if you have a system that allows you to add hops and remove them again later without adding too much oxygen, I would definitely experiment and see how dry hopping at different stages of fermentation can alter those flavors and aromas. But as far as this beer goes, we're just going to be adding 2.5 ounces each of Lotus and Sabro, along with an extra ounce of Strata. This puts us a little over that 1 ounce per gallon rate, and we're also going to be adding that after the beer has cooled down to 55 degrees on day 5, only about 3 days or so before we transfer. The short dry hop duration and cooler temperatures will lead to less polyphenol extraction, so less hop burn can lead to less hop creep and will improve head retention, and can reduce myrcene compounds, letting the monoterpene alcohols shine, which should lead to a more fruit-forward beer. Okay, so it's been about 48 hours, and the bubbling from the blow-off tube has calmed down, so we should be past the most active part of fermentation. I'll go ahead and put the poppet and stopper back in the gas post and disconnect, and I'll pull the keg out to warm up a little while it continues to ferment for a few more days. Alright, 2 more days later, and the gravity is reading about 1.024. My last few batches of this finished off around 1.020, so we should just be a couple points away from our final gravity. I'll let this sit out for another day before putting it back in the fridge and bringing it down to 55 degrees. Okay, our beer has cooled down to 55, so we'll go ahead and add our dry hops. Now, I don't have a perfect method of adding these without adding at least a little oxygen, so my method is to connect some CO2, purge the headspace, pop off the lid, toss in the hops, and put the lid back on as quick as I can, and then purge the headspace once more. And I'll let that sit in the fridge for a few more days. Okay, it's been sitting for about 3 days now, and our gravity is reading a steady 1.021, which will be nice and sweet, and gives us about 6.5% alcohol. After purging the keg by filling it with sanitizer and forcing it out with CO2, I'll hook it up here and do a closed transfer from keg to keg to avoid any oxidation. Then we'll pump it to 20 psi and come back when it's nice and carbonated. Hey, alright, it is about 3 days later. It's been sitting at about 20 psi. Turned it down to about serving pressure around 10 psi. And I think it's time to give this a taste. Alright, let's take a look at this. A nice head on it. What a beautiful color. This is such a beautiful color. I love it. And the haze, it's great. Yeah, I think the vanilla hits you right away when you smell it. A little bit of orange. Yeah, that smells very, very good. That is a wonderful, wonderful beer. Yeah, it's got this beautiful full body, really fluffy mouthfeel, a really long finish, kind of coats your mouth with that residual sweetness. It's very nice. Yeah, the first flavors I get. Actually, a little peach and some orange. And it still has like a little bit of a twang of some of that more bitter citrus, like grapefruit, which I think will probably mellow out a little bit over time. I was trying to help mitigate that, so I might maybe do a couple more iterations of this beer to try to avoid it. Even though it tastes very, very good, I did want to try to like lower the amount of like bitter fruit and try to bring up the sweet fruit. But this is still very good. The orange comes through and the vanilla comes through really nicely. Yeah, a little peach, a little guava. Yeah, it's very good. It's almost like a little bowl of tropical fruit and then like a bunch of cream in it. It's like this nice creamy tropical fruit medley. It's very, very good. But yeah, it's just a little, a little twist on the normal New England style with that Sabro and that Lotus that kind of brings a little bit of that earthy, creamy flavor to it. And I highly recommend it. I definitely give it a shot. But yeah, this is a very good beer. I'm gonna drink the rest of this. Cheers.